Hello, 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 I have missed you all so very much. So, I don't know if anybody actually understands the title of today's, video discussion, but I'll explain it in the TLDR and then all that other jazz. The TLDR of all of this is basically, Tony Stark is the most female-coded superhero out of the entire MCU, as far as I have seen it, and I'm about to explain to you why. So let's get into it. So, in my larger friend group, and only my friend group, I don't know if this has been discussed anywhere else. If it is, feel free to link me to where you found it. But in the larger of my friend group, we've always discussed in the MCU all of our favorite characters. Whether we love them, we hate them, or we're just in general indifferent to them. And I came to this conclusion of Tony Stark is female-coded for several different reasons. So here are those reasons. For years, I have personally read Tony Stark as subtextually bisexual in the comics, which hasn't really translated to the films all that well, at least not to the extent that the character of Captain America has been coded as bisexual in all of his films. And before somebody says, but he loves Peggy Carter, he also loves Bucky Barnes. Fight me. I beg of you, fight me. There's always been a borderline homoerotic relationship between Tony and his armor. But, adjacent to this conversation, there's always been an interesting thread in which Tony Stark is femme-coded. And it was discussed between the friend group and the friend group's significant others, and I found this discussion fascinating. Someone related to one of the aforementioned friends who was a fling or paramour, not married, basically. So one of them commented on the concept, stating that while it may be true for the comics, Movieverse Tony Stark is certainly not female-coded. But isn't he, though? Realistically? We have never discussed on this channel how hypermasculinity sometimes seems to go so over the top that it is a full 360, coming out the other side seeming rather feminized, because the hypermasculine male presents as a sexual object with assets on display, slim waist, thick thighs, full chest, for the consumption of the male gaze. But that's not the case with Tony Stark. It isn't his hypermasculinity that makes him seem female-coded. It's the question of agency. For the record, I will probably tackle hypermasculinity in a different video, and deconstruct how you can make a character so hypermasculine and still not have it be toxic. But we'll get to that in a different video. For now, we'll stay on the Tony Stark thing. Tony does seem to possess many traits that we consider culturally feminine, female cliches, such as talking a lot, talking fast, using a rich vocabulary, a short and petite stature as compared to other superheroes, the narrative passing judgment on his promiscuity, the narrative passing judgment on his desire for junk food, his passive demeanor, his self-consciousness about his body, and having to wear Under Armour in public to manage his chest, his avoidance of interpersonal conflict, looking for daddy's love and approval, the way in which he conceals much of his intelligence because he knows that if people saw him for how he really is, they would be off-put by it, i.e. giving the appearance of being smart, but not too smart. And I'm going to explain this really fast. I have a sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is a lawyer. She's a really good lawyer. But most of her clients, because that's what they are, her clients that come to see her, often remark that, oh, are you helping out, insert her legal last name here, lawyer, because they don't associate her with the name. She has a male presenting name. It's actually a male and female name, but that is not the point. The point is because people assume her both gender right name is predominantly male and they see her in the office, they assume, oh, she's just helping them like a secretary, not realizing, no, that's her. That's her office, that's her clientele. She's the one that wins the cases. But because she's girl, she often gets overlooked. So she has to do the appearance of being smart, but not too smart, except when she goes into the courtroom, because at that point, she just demolishes people, because she doesn't give a fuck anymore, which is really interesting, and I personally enjoy that about her. But the eroticizing of his appearance, specifically Tony Stark, because my sister-in-law is amazing, but we have to go back to Tony Stark. The eroticizing of his appearance in the narrative, the focus on what he's wearing, his obsessive-compulsive behavior, meticulous grooming habits, delicate features, dressing to impress professionally, carrying conversation, his weakness being his heart, the fact that he has to dress into a suit that conceals his identity, his true self, to interact with the world, a hard outer shell that conceals his soft inside. There are aspects to Tony Stark in the films that are female-coded. One such example is when he has to basically go toe-to-toe with Loki in the first Avengers movie. He remarks that it's not uncommon when Loki puts the scepter to his chest and it doesn't do anything. He remarks it's not uncommon, 1 out of 5, and then Loki chokes him and cuts him off. I have said that before to a bunch of guys, jokingly. It's kind of like a immediate Femme response, like, oh, you're trying to act all big and bad, it doesn't work out. Oh, don't worry, it's not uncommon, 1 out of 5 guys has that problem, you should probably see your doctor. It's a thing. It's like the go-to joke, because what better way to take a dig at an aggressive male than to go for something that is very masculine, their ability to basically get it up. For the kids in the audience, oh, why am I saying that? I don't have kids in my audience. Never mind, I retract that statement. I think that some people might find these aspects difficult to see because there are 3 distinct personas to the character. There's the Tony Stark that he projects to the outside world to hide who he really is, and that's his true armor. The billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, fucking asshole of a person. Then there's Iron Man. That is a prosthetic, an armor that shields him and allows him to protect and be protected, and that's more or less kind of not really who he is, but it's closer to it. And then there's Tony Stark, the person he is in his heart of hearts, that we see only when we're alone with the artificial intelligences he created for himself as his friends. The only friends that he really truly has and we get to see because he knows that they won't judge him for all of his weird idiosyncrasies. While we are on the subject of the bots as well, Tony did make them in his childhood for the express purpose of making friends because he just didn't have the ability to make IRL ones. And because of this, they are as real to him as actual real people. It's the reason why in the Age of Ultron movies, when Ultron kills, air quotes, that Jarvis, he takes it really to heart and takes it really hard, is because as far as he was concerned, Jarvis the AI was in direct correlation with Jarvis the butler, who helped raise him from childhood since mommy and daddy were just oh so busy and honestly didn't care about their only begotten child. So why am I bringing it up? Well, because the artificial intelligence he created for himself as his friends, and the only friends that he really truly gets to see the real him, are kind of like the outlier in like the narrative, because everybody else doesn't see them as that. They see them as tools. And we see glimpses of the real Tony Stark in Afghanistan in his interactions with Jensen and then again with Natasha, and in 2 scenes with Steve while they're cutting wood and Tony asking Steve whether he knew about what Bucky did to his parents. But again, these are considered outliers. When you don't ever see somebody for their real self, suddenly having it snap at you becomes conflicting. Because she just went crazy, man, I don't know what happened. Well, no, that personality's always been there. She's just never been comfortable enough with you to show that side. Femme coding. But these 3 sides to Tony Stark are there. And I often see fans of just the MCU in general and of like the original Avengers-esque movies confuse his Tony Stark armor, his protective persona, with who he is because that is, by design, the loudest, most visible side to him. There are many sides to him that are female-coded, but it's the limited agency that he's given in the narrative that's the most telling. Most of his stories seem to revolve around the stripping of his agency and his struggles to regain it. This character, genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, who ought to be the ultimate male power fantasy, has all of his stories constructed around his lack of agency and his need of a prosthetic to claim the agency for himself. Before somebody tells me, no, that doesn't sound right, in all 3 of his movies, he is literally the damsel in distress. He's still the good guy at the end of all of them, but he is, in fact, the damsel in distress. And before somebody says, oh, but the Avengers movie, I'm not talking about the Avengers larger collective movies. I am talking specifically about the Iron Man movies. The title character is Iron Man, is Tony Stark, is this wild little ball of trauma with too much sarcasm and an alcohol addiction. That's who I'm talking about. I am not talking about the greater, grander, overarching MCU universe. I'll be completely honest with you right here and now. I stopped watching the MCU after Thanos was defeated, because as far as I was concerned, there is no way to top the guy who snapped his fingers and destroyed 50% of everything with a thought and like a wink. There's no way to top that. So as far as I was concerned, the MCU is concluded. All of these other movies that have subsequently been coming out should have been shoved in to fulfill that story more if they wanted to keep making and piggybacking off of it. But because they didn't, I am not going to waste money trying to pretend to give a crap about characters I don't know enough about to pretend to give a crap about, because I'm sorry, I was there when the original MCU was coming out every month for, a new movie release. It got tiring. I watched all of them, tragically, but I still watched them. Now, when they're trying to do MCU 5.8, I'm like, I don't care. I really don't. I had to struggle to get through all of the MCU Disney Plus TV series. I think I got through 2 of them. And 2 of them I struggled hard on. I got through the Loki TV series and I got through the WandaVision TV series because I liked those characters. I liked where their story was going. Every other subsequent character has interesting premises, but I cannot pretend to care because I do not know enough about these characters in order to pretend that I want to learn about them. Is that wrong? Yes, but I'm a story-based person first. If your story is, in all honesty, boring, then I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to waste my very limited free time watching it, giving it, thoughts. I won't. So as far as I am concerned, everything after Thanos got beaten doesn't exist. I just don't care. I know it exists in theory, but unless one of my nieces or nephews decides to autistically infodump on me everything that I absolutely need to know, I'm not going to do it, because I just don't care. But going all the way back to the Tony Stark, thesis that I'm desperately trying to get to my point to. Tony Stark has lack of agency even in his own movies, and before you tell me, well, no, yes, actually that is entirely true. Tony Stark is supposed to be the ultimate male power fantasy. He has all the money, all the toys, all the glam, all the glitz, and yet this good-looking, air quotes, this able-bodied rich CEO, a white CEO of American upper crust society, has all this power in the world, but the narrative begins disabusing the viewer of this notion right off the gate in the very first movie. The narrative deconstructs his agency. While I appreciate that about the Iron Man movies, and how they subverted the roles of the damsel in distress via Pepper Potts, I can also admit the Iron Man movies are pretty, action-y, to a point, but they're more about the cause and effect of things. But we'll get to the cause and effect here in a minute. What I mean is by the damsel in distress is subverted in Pepper Potts is because at the end of the first film, Pepper Potts marches through broken glass in her stiletto shoes to save Tony Stark from something that made me stop and think for days afterwards. The third film basically recreated this subversion of the trope louder for those in the back and the cheap seats that hadn't caught it in the first movie. It was Pepper Potts that was the knight in shining armor, not the title character. The reason why is because in the first movie, when she walks through that glass to go get Tony, she doesn't know if it's okay to go through that broken glass and go get him. She doesn't know if there's other people in there that could potentially hurt her. She saw somebody she loved in trouble and said, fuck it. I am 6 feet in these heels and I'm pissed as hell. I am the scary thing in the dark, not what's ever in there. In the third film, the thing that is killing all of these superpowered people, that Killigan, which is a stupid name, is giving all of these people. They're literally exploding when they use their fire-based powers. She not only uses it, but she turns and gives the viewer, the audience, this, ooh, we about to have a Boston-style fight kind of a look over her shoulder. Because what should have killed her barely fazed her. It made her more aggravated that this was something she was having to deal with. Pepper Potts, in both of these instances, is the hero of the story, not Tony Stark, not Iron Man. And it is Tony Stark that we see in the damsel in distress, particularly again in the first and the third films, predominantly in those films. The first film contains the iconic scene of Obadiah Stane literally removing Tony's agency in a scene that is filmed like a sexual violation, a none too subtle air of erotic violence in the air as he uses his date rape technology to incapacitate Tony. And before somebody tells me, oh, I didn't take it like that, it is literally a machine designed to scramble the brain enough to where physical mobility is shot, but your brain is still desperately aware of what's happening and is trying to get you to move, because what's happening to you is going to scar you for life. And it does scar Tony for life. He is very gun-shy about people being near his quote-unquote biggest weakness, because if they take that out, he's now officially on the clock, and it's not good. But this, the Obadiah Stane removing his literal heart in the film, this is a turning point in particularly the first Iron Man movie, because it shows you Tony Stark does have a weakness, and if anybody's smart enough to take it out, he's kind of fucked. The third film contains a scene in which Tony Stark is zip-tied to a bed frame with the villain taunting him. It is implied that Tony is similarly, basically they're making a none too subtle nod of Tony's like this in bed too. Which, you know what, we stand a short king. We do. We stand a short king in this house. But the main villain in the third movie, in that scene in particular, acts like a spurred lover, like a crazy, psychopathic, you didn't get the girl kind of ex-friend, a definitive air of seduction to his conduct towards the tied-up hero. Because that is literally his whole entire kit and caboodle during the third movie is, you ditched me when you were supposed to go to prom with me because you said so, and now I've been jealous about it for forever. That is not word for word but happens, but that's how I took it. This is two cases of villains making eroticized advances towards a physically incapacitated Tony Stark, and it isn't the violence or the incapacitation that makes the scenes female-coded, amazingly enough. It is the eroticization of it. It is how sexualized they make it. It is the female character that are subjected to being over-sexualized in violence, generally speaking, because of how the cinematography tends to frame things. When a camera is turned a certain way, like a Dutch angle in horror films, your brain doesn't like not being able to see things straight on. So you do subtly start to turn your head in horror films, but your body is telling you, hey, we're not supposed to have our head at this 32-degree angle while we're watching something, because we don't have enough agency. We don't have enough, roll for endurance. I got a 3. Oh, friend, you don't get out of this. It's gonna hit you. Us turning certain ways makes it harder for us to get out of the way if something's coming. Dutch angles in horror films are designed to make you uncomfortable. The film in which Tony Stark shows up and he is having all of this done to him, it is framed in certain ways in other movies as, I'm not supposed to be happy about this. And you're not. The second film does not follow the pattern, right? But it could be interpreted as an obsessive, spurred man making unwanted advances towards our hero. If Tony Stark was a girl in this scene, people would have a hissy fit because how dare you put that into a movie that kids are at? First of all, the first Iron Man movie was rated PG-13. I don't know what little kids are going to see this. That sounds like a you problem, Martha, but I digress. So here's the thing, too. When we were talking about this, the larger friend group, we did actually end up discussing, Natasha Romanov is also hypersexualized in all of her movies, to which I pointed out, yes, because she's designed that way. That's her whole kit and caboodle. She's a spy, and she knows she's very aesthetically pleasing, so she uses it to her advantage. And some people have described Tony's hiring of her as sexist, undoubtedly influenced by Pepper's interpretation of his behavior as he tried to figure her out. But here's the thing. When Tony says, I want one, and Pepper says no, you can tell by the way Tony is looking, he's not gazing her up and down like she's a piece of meat. He's looking at her and immediately says that after Natasha body flips happy, a man at least 3 times her weight, if not twice her size, like a pancake. And Tony's like, I want one. What do you want? Do you want a cool badass lady that can flip dudes like pancakes? Or do you want one you want her? You want a teacher that can teach you, who's also short, how to use your small size to your advantage. There's a lot of ways you can take that, because his eyes don't track Natasha as sexual assets. Tony saw something of himself in her, especially in the way she was playing a role, but even more than that, I think Tony saw in Natasha Romanoff something that he wanted desperately to be. He wanted to be in control of his own fucking narrative. I think he was tired of being the pitiful protagonist at some point. Natasha Romanoff gives off airs of being in control even when she gives up control, and she's the opposite of Tony Stark. At one point, in one movie, she's tied up, this guy is talking to her, she gets handed the phone, and she's telling Nick Fury on the other end, I'm getting this idiot to give us everything we want. Can you wait for 20 more minutes and then I'll get you what you need? And when the man says, I haven't given you anything, she gives him this, are you stupid look? Because she had been playing and conning him from the word go. And he hadn't realized it, whereas Tony just straight up gets kidnapped and has to think on the fly. Natasha gets kidnapped with a plan already formulated, which is totally different. With this in mind, I don't remember whether I wrote this in this script beforehand, or I may have just stumbled upon it while talking about this, but in the climax of Civil War, when Tony is literally being double-teamed by the super soldiers of getting the shit beat out of him, it is implied that Tony just is okay with killing his villains. His suit is designed to just take out massive world-ending threats because he made it that way. So, I'm sorry, Steve, I'm sorry, Bucky, but if Tony really didn't want you guys around anymore, he could have just nuked you right then and there, but he didn't. He basically tried to fight fisticuffs and failed. The ending of that scene, especially with Steve straddling Tony, pounding on him, grunting, finishing it off with breathing heavily as he falls off Tony, having penetrated his arc reactor with his shield, having incapacitated Tony's prosthetic, which is what the armor is. Tony spits out blood as the super soldiers walk away from him. It's rather symbolic. The implication of the scene is very uncomfortable. If you know, you know. I'm not gonna sit here and, wax poetic about it. I've already done that in a couple other videos. But Tony does remark to him, that shield doesn't belong to you. You don't deserve it. Why does Tony say that? Because Tony realizes that, yes, Steve Rogers does make a good Captain America, but in this instance, in the Civil War, his judgment is flawed. His judgment is completely out the window, and he needs to be told, you are way, way, way out in left field, and you don't deserve the title of Captain America anymore, specifically while this is going on, because Steve is compromised in Civil War, and Tony realizes that, but Steve doesn't want to think about that, because while Bucky Barnes is another character whose story heavily features the stripping down of agency, the female coding of the strong, stoic, silent type is largely absent. Bucky Barnes is just some dude who got brainwashed. Tony Stark is female coded and has his agency stripped away because of how the narrative makes it of him. They share similarities, and in this, he offers a contrast to Tony, but Bucky Barnes is definitely not femme coded. Bucky is as hard mask as you can get. So yes, I do see Tony Stark of the movieverse as female coded as far as superhero goes, because his story revolves around desperately grasping for agency. Among these hyper-masculine heroes, the genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist is at a disadvantage. So Tony Stark invented, constructed, and put on a suit that hides his true identity in order to have a measure of agency in the hyper-masculine world that allows him to insert himself. And in Civil War, he was willing to sign off on his self-created agency because the establishment had managed to convince him that as a person with near unlimited resources, he was a danger to the world that he had risked his life and the lives of his loved ones to protect. I want to bring this up because I did bring this up with friends and they agreed with me, but also one of their wives snapped at me and we got into an argument, and we eventually made up, but we did get into an argument about it for a couple days. During the Sokovia Accords, Tony makes all of these things known, right? Is because when he meets the Maximoff twins, the Maximoff twins, Wanda and Pietro, they tell him, your bomb crashed into our house during a civil war that was happening in Sokovia, and it didn't go off, and we waited for 3 days for it to kill us because we couldn't get out. Why? Why is this a thing? Because the agency in that is also put right in front of Tony. That agency literally being your lack of agency prior to taking over the Tony Stark, Stark Incorporated Industries, is called into question. It doesn't matter that you weren't there when it happened. It matters that your name is on everything. You are the person that they are going to blame. Because when you're the boss, everything is your fault. It doesn't matter that Tony could have been, in college when this happened. It doesn't matter that Tony Stark could have been anywhere else. It didn't matter that maybe Obadiah Stane was double dealing underneath the table, which it is heavily implied that he was doing anyway. What matters is, straight up, your bomb crashed into their house. They wanted revenge against you because of what you didn't do. Because you weren't there to take agency and come help them. So it's your fault. It doesn't matter that that's not how that works. That's how emotions work. Which is why Wanda and Pietro, at least in the movieverse, right? Only the movieverse, perceived it. And I think one of the most telling aspects of his character during Civil War is that it's considered too dangerous for him to attempt to influence the outside world and other people in it. Tony Stark instead turned within and attempted to modify his own internal world to literally influence his own internal state instead, to accept what he can't change. This is a classic strategy for the disenfranchised. In conclusion, Tony Stark is the most female-coded of the male superheroes, and I will die on this hill. Is there anything else that I absolutely need to talk about in this video? No. Okay, bye. Love you. Be safe.